Tonight I am here to talk about my journey. As I've traveled during college, and I've done my fair share of that, I've learned that I can use my journaling to not only reflect on my experiences, but also to explore the changes that have occurred in myself. So, if you will, go back with me to a really important time when these changes really began. It's an alternative break trip that I took my sophomore year to Puerto Rico. Now, I came into the College of Charleston as a Bonner leader, and through this program, I not only can do a lot of community service, I also get to bond with other Bonner students and do leadership development. But perhaps one of my favorite parts is that I get to take 4 different alternative break trips internationally and nationally to do service during regularly scheduled school breaks. So, I, as a sophomore, went with the other freshman and sophomore Bonners to Puerto Rico, and we spent a week there. But 2 of the days were actually spent in LUK rainforest. And what we were doing there is swinging pickaxes overhead to build a trail that researchers would use to study a species of parrot unique to Puerto Rico. And so as I'm doing this work, I'm thinking, how is this connected to my community, to me, to the bigger social issues? So at night, during our group reflection, we sat down and talked about these things. And one of the issues that came up is deforestation. And one of the main causes that we learned of deforestation is actually coffee production. And so what people will do is go and clear out a huge chunk of the rainforest to build a coffee plantation. So I was really disturbed by the environmental ethics that were going on here, but I also learned that there are some human ethics really problematic here. So the people that are actually growing the coffee, I learned were treated really unfairly. So even though I was in this beautiful protected rainforest, all I could think about was how the environment was being destroyed and how people were being oppressed. And I let this disrupt my life a little bit. I wanted to bring it back to Charleston. So when I returned home, I began doing my own informal research using what else? The Google machine. And what I discovered is that people involved in coffee production aren't just treated unfairly or paid little wages. Many of them are actually enslaved. They were getting no money for the work that they were doing. And this led me to this whole world of human trafficking, of modern day slavery. I was discovering that there are 27 million people that are bound in the labor or the sex industry. I couldn't hear this and not do something. I stopped drinking coffee for a while because that was the easiest first step. I realized how much I valued my own independence and my own freedom. I thought about how repulsive slavery was, back in the 1800s in the United States. But how much more repulsive is it to think about slavery being here now? It was oppression that I would not stand for. And that was when I really found India. There were a lot of nonprofits that are doing work there with human trafficking, particularly with women. In India, there's a history of women being treated as second-class citizens, of domestic violence, and I have this dream of actually going to India and working with those women. So after feeling hopeless and passive for nearly a month, I decided I needed to find a way to get involved. So first, small baby step, I found fair trade coffee so that I could actively support human dignity. But there were other ways of taking action here in Charleston. So with Bonner, I work with community partners doing about 300 hours of community service during the course of a year. And at the time, there were no organizations specifically working with human trafficking. So I found 2 that were connected to root causes of human trafficking victimization. One of those is Darkness to Light, which, if you haven't heard of it, works to educate adults about preventing child sexual abuse. Now, you can imagine the connection between child sexual abuse and how that can lead to somebody being vulnerable to be trafficked, especially in the sex industry later in life. I also began teaching English as a second language at St. Matthew's Outreach Learning Center. And language is really closely connected to trafficking because what traffickers will often do is take people out of a comfort zone where they know the language, the culture, their rights. And then people don't know these things and they're even more bound, not only literally to this trafficker, but also because of their lack of ability to communicate and stand up for themselves. So as I was teaching English, I had the opportunity to work just down the street with immigrants about, teaching them the language and teaching them their rights. But I also made me realize that if I wanted to go into other communities and work with issues like this, that I needed to begin learning the language and culture myself. So I decided to start taking Hindi classes here at the College of Charleston and began getting a few steps closer to my dream of going to India. I'd been learning about these social issues through Bonner, through Alternative Break, even an honors class that worked with the Center for Civic Engagement to travel to Honduras for 3 weeks and work with an asset-based community development organization. But I wanted a little bit more, so I decided to change my major to sociology, where the conversations about not only social problems, but also social solutions were alive and thriving. And I realized that I wanted to engage these social problems and solutions that I was learning about actually in India. And I realized I could never reach that while in an American classroom. So I applied for a critical language scholarship, which would allow me to study Hindi in India for 2 months this summer. And I got it. But it didn't feel real until I was on the ground in Jaipur, India this summer in June. So I would spend my mornings learning Hindi in a classroom setting with other American students, speaking, listening, writing. But I wanted to engage the language and culture a little bit more authentically. So in the afternoons, I went with 3 other American students to a home for women coming from abusive situations, just seeking shelter and looking for a better situation. And so we would spend 2 afternoons each week teaching English there, and I came face to face with how language can really open doors for people. One of the women I met, named Madhu, teaches now in an English medium school and is financially independent of her husband. She described herself to me as feeling empowered. So I saw the oppression firsthand. I imagined myself in every story that I heard these women tell, and in a lot of ways it was really crushing. And now that I'm back, I'm worn out processing everything that I've experienced there. But the women that I met also inspired me to stand up for my own rights and to begin defending theirs as best I can. So after I graduate, maybe I'll return to India. Maybe I will work with human trafficking at a nonprofit there. I'll start my own. But I can't say for sure what will happen. You can see how much my life has changed in the past 2 years, and I still have 1 year to go. My experiences remind me of that familiar Gandhi quote, "Khud badlav baniye jo, dunya mein aap dekhna chahte hain." I've thought a lot about this quote in the past few years, about how I could exemplify the change I wanted the world to follow. But what I realize is that sometimes being the change is really just being changed yourself. Making a difference in the world is sometimes as simple as making yourself a different person. And at the end of the day, that's enough for me. Thank you.